he was number 7.
You know, I don't actually give a f. I hate everyone. I hate everyone ranked in front of me.
So here's how a backstage chat between two UFC fighters turned into one of the most vicious feuds mixed martial arts has ever witnessed. Personal attacks got darker, boundaries disappeared completely, and before long a deceased friend became part of the ammunition. The exact moment everything exploded is coming up next. When boundaries get obliterated, the MMA world has always embraced a certain level of verbal warfare as standard operating procedure for building fights. Competitors regularly threaten destruction, mock their opponent's toughness, and dive into mind games specifically crafted to build hype and mess with their rivals' psychology long before they enter that cage. Look at any number of examples. Conor McGregor's legendary psychological demolition of opponents, Chael Sonnen's wrestling-inspired promotional genius, or the endless press conference explosions that have become just as central to the sport as the actual combat. Yet even in this environment where hostility is practically expected, certain boundaries still exist. Unspoken rules that distinguish entertaining promotional banter from truly personal warfare that can inflict damage no physical strike could match. During the morning hours of January 9th, 2026, around 8:12 a.m. GMT, Dan Hooker decided to fire back at Pimblett's provocative statements, and his response crossed territory that many considered even more forbidden than what Pimblett had said about his mother. Hooker went to X, previously Twitter, and posted video footage from their cordial November 2025 meeting at UFC Cater, the exact same clip that had previously circulated as proof of genuine respect between the two fighters. But this time, the message attached to that video told a completely different story. Those last two words were RIP Ricky, paired with dove and tombstone emojis, turning what could have stayed regular social media drama into something much more sinister and troubling. Hooker was making a direct call out to Ricky Warnick, Pimblett's close companion who had taken his own life on July 21st, 2022, mere hours before Pimblett's weigh-in against Jordan Levitt. This was the exact same friend whose passing Pimblett had shared in that emotional post-fight moment. The identical tragedy that had driven Pimblett's passionate work supporting men's mental health awareness. The emotional weight of invoking such a reference goes beyond ordinary insults. Suicide creates a specific kind of trauma that ripples through not just immediate family members, but entire networks of friends and associates who struggle to make sense of their loss. For Pimblett, who had spoken openly about how devastating Ricky's death had been for his life and fighting career, seeing his friend's memory weaponized in an online argument must have hit with a particular cruelty that went far beyond standard trash talk. This wasn't just questioning his fighting skills or his personality, it was reopening grief, loss, and all the work he had put into turning tragedy into meaningful advocacy. Hooker's tweet pulled in roughly 6,500 likes, 212 shares, 294 comments, and a massive 1.7 million views. The MMA world was locked in, and people were already picking sides about who had stepped over the more serious boundary in this rapidly spiraling situation. But Hooker wasn't done yet. Just 17 minutes later, around 8:29 a.m. GMT, another post went up, this one carrying a more direct warning. The expression on-site, slang for on-site, has a very particular meaning. A promise to initiate physical confrontation the instant you encounter that person, with zero discussion, zero warnings, and zero hesitation. This wasn't performance art for the camera, this was a straightforward threat of violence that went way beyond anything related to sport. This follow-up post went viral even harder, generating roughly 18,000 likes, 37.6 shares, 33 comments, and 1.3 million views. The beef had officially jumped from online posturing to promises of real-world physical confrontation. For several hours, Pimblett stayed quiet while the MMA community tore itself apart, debating who was more wrong in this complete breakdown of professional courtesy. Social platforms turned into war zones with passionate takes from fans, fighters, commentators, and random observers all weighing in on who deserved more blame for this catastrophic relationship meltdown. Comment sections became battlefields as each fighter's supporters defended their guy while attacking the other, creating threads that stretched into hundreds of posts packed with anger and accusations. One camp argued that bringing up a friend who had died by suicide, especially considering Pimblett's subsequent charity work and the emotional wounds still surrounding that tragedy, represented the absolute lowest possible attack, hitting territory so sacred that no provocation could possibly justify crossing it. They pointed to everything Pimblett had accomplished since Ricky's passing, the money raised for mental health organizations, the conversations he'd started about male suicide prevention, and argued that using this tragedy as social media ammunition showed a level of heartlessness that transcended normal fighter promotion. At roughly 3:02 p.m. GMT, Pimblett finally responded with a message that accepted Hooker's challenge, while simultaneously calling out his methods. In this single tweet, Pimblett managed several things at once. He brought up Hooker's earlier comments about resenting higher-ranked fighters, turning that friendly conversation into weapons for their current war. Pimblett held the number 5 spot in the UFC lightweight rankings at this point, while Hooker had dropped to somewhere around 8 or 9 following his submission loss to Sarukian. He tried to frame his original statement as just a hypothetical joke about grappling skills, a description many people felt seriously downplayed how offensive his comments actually were. Most critically, he directly condemned Hooker for mentioning his dead friend, calling it the lowest possible move. Pimblett's response got approximately 3,100 likes, 73 shares, 36 comments, and 29,000 views. And with that final exchange, the confrontation seemed to end. No additional posts appeared from either fighter as the day wound down, leaving the MMA community to digest what they had just experienced. The timing made everything even more complicated. Pimblett was just 15 days out from the most important fight of his career, an interim UFC lightweight title bout against Justin Gaethje at UFC 324 on January 24, 2026. This fight meant Pimblett's first real shot at championship gold. Meanwhile, Hooker was booked to face Benoit Sandini at UFC 325 on January 31, 2026. Both fighters had major professional commitments coming up fast, yet neither seemed ready to step back from this personal war. The friendship that was never meant to be. In the ruthless theater of mixed martial arts, where athletes regularly batter each other unconscious for the entertainment of masses, there's an unspoken rulebook, invisible lines that even the most vicious competitors instinctively know should never be violated. These limits rarely get discussed openly, yet everyone involved in the brutal world of professional fighting naturally recognizes they exist. And on January 9th, 2026, two of the UFC's most captivating lightweight fighters didn't just step over that boundary, they completely demolished it, leaving nothing but wasteland and the burning wreckage of what many thought was a real friendship built through shared competition. The saga of Paddy Pimblett and Dan Hooker's explosive online confrontation stands as one of the most dramatic and deeply personal conflicts to emerge in recent UFC memory, a clash that would involve mentions of deceased friends, mothers, and the type of verbal combat that makes regular trash talk look like polite small talk. But to really grasp the scale of what happened between these two warriors, we need to first look at the complex web of circumstances that led to this disastrous relationship breakdown and understand exactly who these fighters are and what pushes them to compete at combat sport's highest level. Paddy the Baddy Pimblett exists as one of the most divisive personalities in modern mixed martial arts, a competitor whose mere presence seems calculated to trigger extreme responses from observers across the sporting landscape. Born January 3rd, 1995 in Liverpool, England, this magnetic scouser has constructed an empire built on undeniable fighting talent, his contagious personality, and his readiness to voice his opinions regardless of whatever consequences that honesty might bring. At just 31 years old, Pimblett has assembled an outstanding professional record of 23 wins against only 3 losses, with his submission skills responsible for 10 of those victories, and his developing striking adding another 7 knockout finishes to his collection. Even more remarkable than these statistics is his flawless record inside the UFC's Octagon, a perfect 7-0 run that has launched him from regional circuit favorite to one of the most discussed fighters on earth. His path to UFC stardom started long before his promotional debut in 2021, reaching back through years of growth in the crucible of European mixed martial arts. As the former Cage Warriors featherweight champion, Pimblett dominated the European MMA landscape with a blend of technical grappling and an almost supernatural talent for creating excitement wherever he fought. His UFC debut against Luigi Vendramini concluded in spectacular style with a TKO finish that earned him Performance of the Night bonuses and announced to the MMA world that a new star had emerged on the sport's biggest platform. Follow-up wins over Jordan Levitt, Jared Gordon, Tony Ferguson, Bobby Green, and most importantly Michael Chandler in 2025, a knockout that stood as his most impressive accomplishment yet. Established Pimblett as a legitimate threat in the lightweight division, but Pimblett's career story goes far beyond victories and defeats, knockouts and submissions. In July 2022, after his submission win over Jordan Levitt at UFC London, Pimblett shared with the world that he had discovered his close friend Ricky had died by suicide just hours before the weigh-ins. In one of the most emotionally raw post-fight interviews in UFC memory, tears flowing down his face and his voice cracking with pain, Pimblett used his moment to deliver a heartfelt message about men's mental health awareness. He stated that a stigma exists in this world, preventing men from discussing their emotions, and begged anyone considering such a tragic choice to please reach out to someone, anyone, about their pain. The burden Pimblett had carried into that fight was almost impossible for viewers to comprehend, those who had watched him compete with seeming confidence and composure. Here was someone who had learned of his best friend's death mere hours before needing to make weight for a professional bout, who had somehow pushed aside that crushing grief long enough to enter the Octagon and secure a submission victory, and who had then decided to use his victory speech to advocate for others who might be struggling silently. The genuineness of his emotion was impossible to question. This wasn't promotional theater, but real human vulnerability shown before millions of people. That moment went beyond sport completely, transforming Pimblett from simply a skilled fighter into a legitimate voice for mental health awareness, a mission he has supported consistently ever since. His ongoing work has included supporting charities like James's Place in his beloved Liverpool, an organization focused on providing professional help to men facing suicidal crisis. He has discussed repeatedly in interviews the importance of tearing down the walls that stop men from getting help, about the harmful masculinity that convinces men they must struggle alone, and about his commitment to honoring Ricky's memory by stopping others from making the same heartbreaking decision. The openness Pimblett showed in that post-fight interview gained him respect from areas of the sporting world that had previously written him off as just another loud regional fighter. On the other side of this developing conflict stands Dan the Hangman Hooker, a 35-year-old New Zealand veteran whose journey through the UFC ranks reads like a story of human toughness, determination, and the relentless drive to compete at the highest level despite setbacks that would have crushed weaker competitors. Born February 13, 1990, in Auckland, Hooker brings extensive experience to every fight, having built a professional record of 24 wins against 13 losses throughout his extensive career. Standing 6 feet tall with an impressive 75-inch reach that lets him control distance and dissect opponents from the outside, Hooker's kickboxing background, he captured the King in the Ring middleweight championship before moving to MMA, makes him a dangerous striker who has shared the cage with virtually every major lightweight contender of the current era. Hooker's UFC career, stretching over a decade since his 2014 debut, represents the classic path of a true warrior. While his roughly 14-9 UFC record might not shine with the same undefeated brilliance as Pimblett's perfect run, the caliber of opposition he has faced tells a much more impressive story. His legendary 5-round battle with Dustin Poirier in 2020 remains one of the greatest lightweight fights ever seen, a brutal showcase of heart and technique that earned both fighters permanent respect from the MMA community. Though Hooker came up short in that fight, the performance proved his willingness to stand and trade with the division's best, absorbing tremendous damage while continuing to return fire with his own strikes. His split decision win over Paul Felder, a fight of the night classic that saw both men give everything over 5 punishing rounds, and his victory over Matej Gamrot in 2024 confirmed his reputation as someone who refuses to be an easy night for anyone. Training at the legendary City Kickboxing Gym in Auckland alongside Israel Adesanya and other elite competitors, Hooker has refined a striking system that combines technical accuracy with real knockout power. His long reach lets him control distance and pick apart opponents from the outside, while his toughness allows him to survive moments when that distance gets closed. Yet his recent submission loss to Arman Tajarukian at UFC Qatar in November 2025 had revealed continuing weaknesses in his grappling defense, vulnerabilities that would soon become the target of harsh mockery from an unlikely source. Before January 2026, the relationship between these two fighters seemed to be nothing but respectful, even friendly, based on available evidence. At UFC Qatar in November 2025, where Hooker was fighting Arman Tsarukyan, the two fighters met backstage during the weigh-ins. Pimblett was in Qatar supporting a teammate, and the two lightweights found themselves together during the pre-fight activities. Video footage from that meeting shows them talking pleasantly, laughing together, showing none of the hostility that would soon destroy their relationship. The body language was comfortable, the conversation seemed real, and anyone watching would have had zero reason to think these two men held any grudges against each other. While defending Gaethje's age, the American was 37 at the time, Pimblett made a comparison to Hooker, saying with his typical Liverpool directness that people were calling Justin Gaethje old, but he was only 2 years older than Dan Hooker. Then came the statement that started the firestorm. A vulgar, offensive remark suggesting that Dan Hooker's grappling skills were so terrible that he couldn't even defend his own mother in a hypothetical assault situation. The exact phrasing was crude enough to mock Hooker's grappling defense while simultaneously dragging his mother into an extreme and offensive scenario. The clips spread across social media with lightning speed, shared and reshared by accounts like ChamperDS on X, analyzed and argued over by fans and experts. For many observers, Pimblett's statement represented a major escalation from typical fight promotion talk. Involving an opponent's mother in such a scenario crossed boundaries that many felt should stay untouchable. The aftermath and what happens next. In the immediate wake of this explosive social media war, the UFC and its management stayed noticeably quiet. Dana White, the promotion's president and usually a dependable source for commentary on fighter controversies, made no public statements about the Pimblett-Hooker feud. This silence could be read several ways. Maybe the UFC saw the conflict as a personal issue between two adult professionals, or maybe they realized that any official commentary might just add gasoline to an already burning fire. Alternatively, the promotion might have been quietly happy with the attention this beef was creating for two fighters with major upcoming fights. The difference between this sudden hatred and their friendly November 2025 interaction made the feud even more shocking to people who had seen their cordial backstage meeting at UFC Qatar. Hooker's choice to share that footage alongside his initial attack served as pointed commentary on what he saw as Pimblett's fake behavior. Friendly face-to-face but disparaging when talking to media without Hooker present to defend himself. Media coverage of the situation was widespread, with outlets including MMA Fighting, Low Kick MMA, BGPEN.com, and Sportskeeda providing detailed breakdowns of the exchange. Most coverage focused on the shock value of the confrontation while noting its isolated nature. This was one explosive exchange rather than a long-running rivalry with deep historical roots. The speed with which the relationship had collapsed from friendly to nuclear was itself newsworthy. The MMA community's reaction was predictably split, with heated debates breaking out on both sides. Pimblett supporters pointed to the sacred nature of his friend's memory and the wrongness of weaponizing a suicide for social media points. They argued that regardless of what Pimblett had said about Hooker's mother, however crude or offensive, certain topics should stay off limits, and that Hooker's mention of Ricky's death showed a basic lack of decency that no provocation could justify. Hooker's supporters argued that Pimblett had started the personal attacks by involving Hooker's mother in such a crude and offensive hypothetical situation, and that he had no right to play victim after making comments designed to humiliate and embarrass. They contended that Pimblett's later defense of his comments as just a hypothetical joke showed a complete misunderstanding of why his original statement was so wrong. The career paths of both fighters give important background for understanding why this conflict exploded with such force. Pimblett, at 31 with his perfect 7-0 UFC record, represents the lightweight division's future. His rise has been almost impossibly fast, from regional circuit champion to UFC contender to interim title challenger in just a few short years. His knockout of Michael Chandler in 2025 quieted many critics and proved he was a real threat to anyone in the division. Hooker represents something else. The battle-tested veteran whose peak years may or may not be over. At 35 with a record that includes both brilliant wins and crushing losses, Hooker sits in the difficult middle space between contendership and gatekeeping. His recent loss to Tsarukyan exposed ongoing problems in his grappling defense, the exact weaknesses Pimblett chose to mock in his original interview. These different career trajectories might explain some of the intensity behind their conflict. Pimblett, rising quickly toward a title shot with the confidence of a fighter who's never lost in the UFC, may have felt comfortable dismissing a veteran he saw as declining in relevance. The security of his ranking position combined with his coming title opportunity may have created overconfidence that showed up as reckless trash talk aimed at someone who posed no immediate threat to his career path. Hooker, watching a younger fighter pass him in the rankings while simultaneously mocking his abilities in the most offensive terms possible, may have felt a specific sting that motivated his extreme response. The psychology of professional fighting is complicated, involving ego, pride, financial pressure, and knowing that every performance could be the one that makes or breaks a career. For a veteran like Hooker, seeing a relative newcomer dismiss decades of work with a crude joke about his mother may have triggered something primal, a need to hurt as deeply as he had been hurt, regardless of consequences. No official fight between Pimblett and Hooker has been announced, and given their respective scheduled fights in late January 2026, such a matchup couldn't happen until spring at the earliest. However, the on-site challenge Hooker issued and Pimblett accepted suggests that any future meeting between these fighters could potentially escalate beyond verbal conflict. The UFC may eventually try to profit from this bad blood by booking them against each other. Such a fight would carry serious promotional weight. The cocky young star against the respected veteran, the mental health advocate against the man who mentioned his friend's death. The promotional angles are endless, even if the ethics of profiting from such deeply personal hatred remain questionable. From a matchmaking standpoint, a Pimblett-Hooker fight makes sense beyond the story elements. Both men compete in the same division, hold similar ranking positions, and have styles that could create an entertaining fight. Pimblett's grappling skills against Hooker's striking would make a classic stylistic matchup, while both men's willingness to engage in their histories of delivering exciting fights suggest a bout that would provide entertainment value regardless of the personal hatred driving it. The UFC has shown repeatedly that it sees real fighter animosity as a promotional advantage, rather than a problem to solve. The most successful pay-per-views often feature fighters who genuinely hate each other, whose desire to cause damage goes beyond professional duty into personal revenge. A Pimblett-Hooker fight would fit perfectly into this promotional strategy, offering the kind of authentic bad blood that can't be created through press conference acting alone. However, the promotion must also weigh potential downsides of such a booking. The on-site threats both fighters exchanged raise real concerns about what might happen at press conferences, weigh-ins, or other promotional events leading up to a potential fight. While controlled confrontations can create buzz and sell tickets, genuinely hostile encounters can hurt the promotion's image and create legal problems. The difference between promotional theater and real danger can be hard to spot, and the UFC would need to carefully handle any future interactions between these two fighters. For now, both fighters must concentrate on their immediate challenges. Pimblett must channel whatever feelings this conflict has created into his preparation for Justin Gaethje, a fight that could establish him as a legitimate champion or expose him as promoted beyond his actual ability level. Hooker must similarly set aside his anger while preparing for Benoit Saint-Denis, a fight that could restart his title hopes or continue his slide toward veteran gatekeeper status. The MMA community will watch both fights with extra interest, studying not just the technical performances but also the mental states of both fighters. Will this conflict give Pimblett additional motivation, an extra chip on his shoulder that fuels a career-best performance against Gaethje? Or will it distract him from his preparation, bringing emotional chaos into a camp that should have been focused entirely on the interim title? Will Hooker's aggressive response suggest a fighter who lost emotional control, letting anger override good judgment in ways that might affect his performance? Or will it show a warrior who refuses to be disrespected, turning his frustration into focused aggression? These questions will find answers in the Octagon, where the truth of a fighter's character ultimately shows itself through actions rather than words. The cage has a way of removing pretense, of revealing both strengths and weaknesses that words can hide, and both Pimblett and Hooker will face opponents capable of testing every part of their preparation, their skills, and their mental strength. But regardless of how their upcoming fights go, the events of January 9th, 2026 have permanently changed the relationship between Paddy Pimblett and Dan Hooker. What was once respectful is now hostile, what was once friendly is now bitter enemy territory, and the mention of a dead friend's memory has guaranteed that this conflict will carry scars that may never completely heal. In the harsh world of professional fighting where physical violence is the measure of success, it's perhaps fitting that the deepest wounds often come from words rather than punches. Pimblett's crude hypothetical about Hooker's mother was undeniably offensive, a pointless insult that served no purpose beyond provocation. But Hooker's decision to respond by mentioning R.I.P. Ricky, to weaponize a friend's suicide for social media clout, represented a completely different level of violation. Whether the MMA world has seen the start of a long-running rivalry or just a single explosive incident remains unclear. Some fighter feuds burn bright briefly before cooling into mutual indifference. Others simmer for years before getting settled through cage competition. The Pimblett-Hooker conflict could go either direction, depending on factors neither fighter completely controls, whether the UFC decides to book them against each other, whether they encounter each other at future events, and whether time allows any healing of the damage done on that crucial January day.